Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Before we officially get started, I want to say something, and that is this was my first go at an interview. We did it over Zoom. It didn't record separate tracks, and so what we have is kind of what we have. Learning experience number one. So I, in this soundtrack, often am just a little bit too loud, and I'm telling you now so that you can turn your volume down as necessary and know that from the start, I realized this happened. There wasn't much that I could do to correct it. It's not always the case, so I think we can live with it, and it's a learning experience. With that said, here comes the episode. Hello and welcome to Unleaderly, the podcast that looks at the world through an atypical leadership perspective. I am your host, Barbara Iverson, and today I am joined for our very first interview by my friend Nathan Higdon. I'm going to let him introduce himself because he's got a lot of stuff going on, and if I tried to remember it all, I know I wouldn't. But he and I have a mutual friend, Aaron, who lives in Knoxville, Tennessee, and we met actually in person. We met a long time ago and we became instant besties. So in starting the podcast, although, to be honest, I have followed him mostly on Facebook through all of his adventures since then. And starting this podcast, Aaron was after me. You need to talk to Nathan. You need to talk to Nathan. And then now I'm talking to Nathan and I'm so happy. So Nathan, welcome. And would you give us, please, an introduction to who you are and why this podcast might possibly be interesting for you?
Yeah. Hey, if you're listening, I am Nathan Higdon. I am a marketing and management professor at Maryville College in East Tennessee. I have a PhD in business administration from Oklahoma State. I went back and did that in my, early 40s. So I do that. I'm vice chair of the Tennessee Democratic Party, and I also do work with a consulting firm in Washington, D.C., and I do social impact and thought leadership along with government affairs consulting work. So we'll work, say, with a big company, and so we help them to do good work in the community. I teach principles of marketing and intro management. It kind of made sense that a lot of what you are doing in Unleaderly is what I deal with my students every day, is them not understanding the difference between management and leadership.
And what would you say is the crux of the difference between management and leadership?
Anyone can be a manager. I'm like, here's the Cliff's Notes. Anyone can be a manager, but few people, even those who think they are leaders. A manager is something you get hired into, but being a leader, is something that is slightly innate. I think you can learn to be a leader for sure, but it's far more helpful if it's just a natural tendency for folks.
Yeah. So that kind of born to be a leader or something you're born into. I would agree with you that definitely a manager is a job. It's a job title. And you don't have to be a natural or even developed leader to have that job. There's actually tons of people who are managers who are nothing like leaders. You can be a leader on a team and not be the manager. You can be a leader on a team and also be the manager. Learning how to lead it's kind of a different animal than learning management skills.
It really is. I'm certain we both worked in teams where the person who was the manager wasn't the leader. And
right.
I think it's one of those interesting things, growing up Southern, like, being too assertive or stepping out there was a little, I should be a little more demure or whatever. And then coming to the realization that I am, in fact, a leader. I oftentimes, regardless of either having a title of management or some kind of thing in there, I always end up floating up and leading. I'm like, all right. And it's probably a function of being a Capricorn too. And I'm like, all right, efficiency, you do this, you do that, you do this. Here's what I'm doing. Let's just get the thing done and come on.
Yeah.
And
I would also call that like a person of influence on a team, right?
Yeah.
Like it's And I think that's how leadership, when you're not the manager or the named leader on a team, will often show up as either directing or being that person of influence that is making things happen.
Do you know, and every time I tell myself when I walk into a situation, like almost every time I'm like, you're just going to sit back against the wall and just let it happen. And then, I'll be waiting for people hemming and hawing to, step forward or do something. And then it's finally, I'm like, okay, we've wasted 15 minutes of everyone trying to defer. So here
Yep.
we go again. And I'm like, literally every time. And I'm like, oh, Nathan, why do you do this? And I'm like, oh, you do this because we've got to get done.
No, but I do the same. And you talk about growing up Southern. I grew up Northern, but a woman. And so some of those expectations for me that you talked about being demure, being, calm and gentle and quiet were also there for me as a girl growing up. But I wonder, why is it that we even feel like we have to push ourselves to the background? Because I do the same thing. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to let everybody else have a turn. I want to make sure that other voices are heard. I don't want to just jump to the front. I'm not a Capricorn, I'm a Gemini, so everybody's my friend. I also have this need to control and get things to happen too, because I can't stand just watching people moving around a room completely aimless and not doing anything. Why do we have this feeling that we should step back?
Oh God, I'm sure my therapist would say that my imposter syndrome from my younger days, and I just can't let go of it. And I always, especially if it's in a group where I know other people's credentials or abilities, it's that assumption that, well, they're equally degreed or they're more this or that. And I'm thinking, I'm the worst for this in terms of I can make big decisions and then I will get like decision fatigue. And when it comes to what to eat for dinner, I'm like, I can't figure it
Yeah.
out. So I make popcorn.
Yeah.
So I don't
I
know.
think decision fatigue. Yeah. No, I think that's a super accurate way to put it, that there are also times when I try to step back because I'm tired actually of being the person who's always stepping to the front. And I want to believe that if I don't, that someone else will step forward. I want to believe that someone else just needs the opportunity to have a space where they can. But I don't
Well,
know.
I get
It doesn't
that.
always work like that.
I get it.
People
Then
still
that's,
wait for you to say something, right?
yeah, they do. And that's actually something that's an interesting segue into what I do with teaching is, I try to push my students through curated opportunities in the classroom to make sure that I always tell them, I said, I know it's such a loaded phrase, but I said, this classroom is a safe space.
Yeah.
And, and sometimes you'll get eye rolls and I'll tell them, well, I said, this is a safe space because the worst you could do in here is fail an assignment, maybe fail the class, which you can retake. In your job, when you fail, you could destroy your career,
Mm.
you could ruin a company, you could drastically impact your life. Not that your decisions here couldn't do that either. And so I was like, that's the safeness of this space, is it's a
Right.
learning environment. So I'm actually encouraging you to make bad decisions so that we can fix them so you learn how to make better ones. That's the point of experience, right?
Yes.
And so in trying to teach them this difference between management and leadership and how sometimes a person can wear both of those hats, but
Mm.
I mean, how often do you see that?
Less often than I feel like I should.
Yeah,
Let's
me
let's say
too.
that. Yeah. I mean, when I got into teaching interpersonal skills at a university here, people were often asking me how I got into that because interpersonal skills is not necessarily something taught in many spaces. The answer I always gave was I had a series of really bad bosses and I wanted to take as much as I possibly could from those experiences so that they would never feel wasted. And that took me through this sort of thinking about what is happening here and why are they doing what they're doing? How does this feel for me as a person on their team? What do I wish they were doing differently? And how would I actually want that to look? And that got me into interpersonal skills, teamwork, feedback, mindsets, communication, any of those things that it sounds like you tackle in your classroom as well, even though it's not called interpersonal skills. Like it's the interpersonal dynamic, I think, that often shows a leader versus a manager.
You said something that made me think. I will like get my reviews from students, like, you're a really good teacher. Like, how did you, or professor or whatever, and they're like, how did you learn to do this? And I said, well, I had a lot of horrible professors along the way. So I came to this from the lens of knowing what not to do.
Yep.
And I think that's how, to a degree, not fully, but I think that's a bit how I learned to lead, as I saw so many people who thought they were leaders or wanted to be leaders or aspirational leaders at best.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's not how to lead people. Coercive leadership, yes, it's a thing that's defined, but
Doesn't make it good.
it doesn't make it good. And, I'm not, with coercive leaders, I tend to be I'm maliciously compliant.
There's an image in my head. Yes, maliciously compliant.
Yeah,
Ugh.
so yeah, I think that we can learn from bad leadership too. Like
Yeah.
I taught this leadership class. It was a summer school class 2 years ago. The class was titled "From the White House to Your House: The Impacts of Leadership," and so we looked kind of at an American political lens of leadership, and we
Yeah.
started with Richard Nixon, and we looked at like Watergate and the gosh, I can't even remember the name of the movie now. I just went blank, but that had Robert Redford in
All the
it.
President's Men.
All the
Yeah.
President's Men. Thank you. I don't know why I went blank. We started there and then worked our way into something a bit more recent, the Laboratories of Autocracy. Wrapped there, and everyone thought it was going to be a super political class, and then they walked away from it with this realization that American politics is full of people who are just itching to let their 12-year-old self be a leader, but most of them never develop the ability to become a leader.
Yeah. Well, because often, I mean, I talked about it, I think, in one of the first episodes of the podcast, that leaders especially, probably not only, but especially in the American imagination, are white, male, tall, maybe loud, or at least have a loud, authoritative voice. Everybody's always surprised to find out that Abraham Lincoln had this really high-pitched, soft, non-authoritative sounding voice. But that's because we didn't live in an age of radio and things then where people were thinking about that kind of thing. But there's this idea, and I think there's many men in particular who could be identified as leaders from a young age, specifically for some of those characteristics. And when you get told you're a leader, you believe you're a leader, whether or not you know what to do with those skills or that tendency, let's call it. But that makes a lot of sense to me then, to connect that to, if you're told in those, say, 9 to 12 years old ages that you're a leader, then some of that further development gets stunted because you've already decided that's what you are, regardless of how you've developed.
Oh, and the unearned self-confidence of mediocre white men in the U.S.
Yes, I wish I had just a tiny bit of that.
Unearned confidence of mediocre straight white men, let me be clear.
Yes, categorize that, because you are not a straight white man.
I am not. Actually, earlier when we were mentioning some of those self-doubts and things, that's where it comes from, is growing up,
Yeah.
gay dude in the South, and East Tennessee specifically, as always having to kind of watch out,
Yep.
watch what I'm saying. It was all about code switching and image crafting. And I mean, to the point I have this conversation fairly regularly. Here I am in my late 40s, and I've finally gotten comfortable enough to let go of this accent that I had manufactured in my like early teens. I probably began to manufacture at about third grade or so. But it was to like really tamp down my Southern accent,
Okay.
to really modulate my voice, all these things, because it's like I didn't want my voice too high. It was all of
Hmm.
these social cues. No one had said this stuff. I just realized that this is the things kind of that needed to happen if I wanted to blend in the 80s and 90s. I was
Sure.
just about to say, I'm like, oh God, I gave away my age, but I'm like, oh, wait, I literally just said how old I was, so it's okay. Wow, what was it like growing up in the 1900s?
Yes, the late 1900s.
So yeah, all of
Yes.
that was to say is like over time I've begun to let go of really holding on to that voice that I'd crafted, and so sometimes my Southern accent will just really come out, y'all. And
You'll sound like Dolly.
oh, I mean, kind of close. That's how my family sounds. I mean, that's where we're from, and
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
if I've had a couple of drinks, it for sure comes out. People are like, "Oh my gosh, you've been hanging out with your family." I'm like, "No, I've had two drinks. This is Nathan."
Yes. Like, how did you give yourself permission to stop using that voice, stop using that manufactured way of speaking?
It was, frankly, a lot of it was through political organizing work that I do.
Okay.
Post 2016 election, as I was doing more and more community organizing, and that's something I've kind of always done, but I kind of turned that up to 12.
Gee, why?
I
Sorry.
don't know. Can't remember. I think there was something that
Something
happened.
about 2016. Let's think back. That's already 10 years ago. Hmm.
I don't recall. I kind of moved myself out of the professional bubble a little bit. When you're doing that organizing
Mm-hmm.
work, a lot of it is like being on the doorsteps, like really rural doorsteps and chatting with folks. And I would
Uh-huh.
kind of just like code switch back to my natural accent with people. And I'd sometimes be out with folks and they're like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh yeah, when we're at the door, I wanted to make sure they were comfortable and listen to me. So, I just talk like, and they're like,
Yeah.
who is that? And I'm like, oh, all right. So when I was a little kid, this is how, and they're like, oh. I said, so what everyone's grown accustomed to and what has become my natural default is my professional voice. But I was like, yeah. So when we were out in, rural East Tennessee, I would just I'd flip back into my natural voice. And
Yeah.
so as I've done more and more political things and gone into more and more rural areas, I realized that those things that will help people to take you more seriously, those components of leadership, because it's mostly in leadership roles that I was going out to talk to folks, and especially now as vice chair of the state party,
Yeah.
I mostly spend my time in rural Tennessee. And so I just let it come and go in the conversation. Like sometimes it will be most of it. And if I notice people are kind of, I'm like, oh yeah, and here's the thing I do. And I'm learning to get more comfortable with it again, y'all. So, and I was like, and sometimes if I'm trying to fight between the two, like if I'm actually thinking about it, I was like, then I start to sound like I'm British. So I was like, it's when the two mix. So I was like, just when you hear that, know that I am very much aware and I'm trying to let go of one or the other. And they're like, that's insane. And I'm like, hey, I was like, if we had a better society, I wouldn't have had to have manufactured this as a queer kid in East Tennessee growing up in the 80s and 90s. I was like, it's just what happened. And I hope kids don't have to do that now. And this is why we're doing the fight. That's a lot. And I'm like, you're welcome.
But I mean, that's totally amazing because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking you have learned how, through community organizing, to actually turn something that as a child you thought was a deficit, you've turned it into a superpower and used it to open doors to being able to talk to people, realizing that they need to be able to identify with you, and how you talk is a huge part of that, for them to say, okay, this is someone who's like me. This isn't someone from out of state. This isn't a stranger to my situation. This is someone who actually may know something about it because they sound like me. And I will say too, I think you also challenge the mistaken, preconceived ideas of, let's say, Northern academics, that people with an accent like that are stupid, and that an accent has anything at all to do with your intellect or your curiosity or your intelligence. I mean, I think that it's doing a lot of different things all at once. And I'm actually super happy to hear that you've embraced that part of yourself again.
When I first started teaching, I guess 6 years ago, becoming a professor was a side hustle, and then now it's become my like I guess my main hustle.
Your main hustle.
Wow,
What
yeah,
was your main hustle before you got your PhD?
marketing consulting work. Then when I got it, and I kind of knew after I'd gotten my master's, I was like, oh, the PhD's got to come. I'm like, I really want to get in the classroom because my undergraduate degree was in Spanish and French, and I taught high school. And I'm like, oh, I loved teaching, but I did not love teaching rural East Tennessee high school kids Spanish. Me llamo, como te llamas? And I'm like, no, I can't do this forever. I'm like,
So
no,
fun.
gracias. I'm like, nope, can't do this. Going back in and teaching really made me realize when I got back into the classrooms here in East Tennessee, I was like, that's when I really learned how I'm like, I need to meet these people. I need to meet these students where they are. And
Yeah.
so making a point to let them know it's kind of like, the way you talk is fine. The way you're presenting yourself is fine. So there are some rough edges we got to clean up for the professional world here, y'all. But it's fine if you've got this deep Southern accent. Don't you be ashamed of that. And
Yes.
I fought that for a long time, and it's okay. We'll all say, well, you don't want to have the accent because you want to be taken seriously. But the way you say things, the way you share your thoughts, regardless of your accent, people will know you're smart. It may take them a
Yes.
minute to understand how you're saying it, if your accent's really, really deep. But I said, people will know you know what you're talking about. You just got to give them a little time. And if they really are shooting
Yeah.
you down, those aren't your people. Walk away from that situation if you can, or
Yeah.
when you can.
Yeah.
So, and that's
For
and
sure.
all that comes back into leadership as well, because I think one of, well, not one of, I think the core component of leadership is communication. And
Yes.
communication is a two-way street. Well, it's not communication if it's only understood one direction. And, being a linguist from undergrad and always paying attention to the way of speaking, I think I was always focused on the communication component. So as leadership opportunities came, it was kind of a natural fit of understanding how to communicate with people,
Right.
honestly.
Yeah, that's really making me think. And I wonder if that's how people get sort of marked as leaders or not when they're kids. I think for part of it, we talked about tall, white, straight men. For girls, I wonder if the communication piece, I just wonder how those work together in kids. I'm just coming back to the conversation we had earlier.
But when you were just talking about that, though, Barb, it really is. Because I was thinking back to grade school. I can't think of any of the people who were really quiet who, or at least in leadership roles that I'm aware. Yeah, and the guys are always encouraged to be commanding.
Yes.
And
If a girl was commanding, she was called bossy, and that was bad.
that's bad. I was trying to think of how did the girls present themselves as leader. I mean, God, I hate to say this part out loud, but frankly, I don't know that any of them were considered leaders in that time and space, right?
I don't think many were. And that's why I think for myself, because I was told I was a leader a lot as a kid, I think it might have really imprinted on me because I don't remember anybody saying that to any of the other girls. I don't remember that it was a conversation that was ever given to a group of girls or that a group of girls was told, you are leaders. It was, and it's not to say that I was the only leader in my class. I'm sure I wasn't, but I was the one. Again, I go back to this tall thing, which I don't know that that has anything to do with anything, but I am tall and I'm also extremely outspoken and I have a very loud voice and have my whole life. I'm regularly asked to keep my voice down. Even in Zoom calls. I was teaching one time and I come in like just talking in I don't know, probably the voice I would use in a classroom. And I could see immediately somebody like changing the volume on their computer. And they were like, could you take it down a second? I was like, oh gosh, yes, okay. I'm so interested now in how we identify leadership qualities from children because I know that it's happening. I know that there are kids who are told they're leaders from young ages. And this is now really an interesting idea of because it's usually teachers then, right? Like it's teachers. I don't remember my family members talking to me like that. It was people outside of the home were telling me that I was a leader.
Yeah, I wouldn't go so far as to say that teachers are the gatekeepers of it, but they are definitely, I think, the first identifiers of it
Yeah.
and plant those seeds. When you were talking, Barb, tell me what you think on this. Like you were talking about, I'm sure there's some research stream on this, but one of the things people who are beginning to identify leaders early on, I think what they look for are how people take up space within their ability to do so around their various intersection of identities. And what I mean by that is like a voice takes up space, right? Height takes up space,
Yeah.
all these different characteristics. And I think we probably look to see how much space someone's taking up, or which could also be their presence too. Like,
Sure.
so that it's not just their physical body, but it's also like how big their personality is, how gregarious
Mm-hmm.
they are. Maybe they've got a big laugh. You know, people with big laughs take up space. And
Yeah.
so some of those kind of things I'm wondering, and I wonder this because as you were talking as well, I thought, well, how do, even though I'm teaching adults for all intents and purposes, how do I identify these people in class as well?
Yeah.
And it's folks who take up more space. You know, the people who always answer the questions, or the people who have the big voices or the big ideas or just
Yep.
take up a big bunch of space, all this. And I was like, I think that might be the thing, is
Mm-hmm.
just making yourself known, because the shrinking violets tend to not be leaders
Yep.
because they're not asserting themselves into the space. Anyway, that
Mm-hmm.
was something I was thinking about while you were talking about that, and I was like, oh, okay, that's surely a thing.
It surely must be. But
Or I made
as
it
you
a
were saying,
thing,
yeah,
daggone it.
do another PhD and let this be your research. I mean, definitely, I am a person who takes up space. I am not a small person. I've never been small in any way. So, yes, physically, I take up space. And I was also always the kid to raise my hand first because my brain works fast. And it doesn't mean that I'm smarter than the average person. I don't know, maybe I am, but I'm faster than many people. My dad used to talk with me about my intellect that way. He would say, you're quick, so you get there faster than other people do. And that's one of the reasons why you raise your hand, you want to say something because you've been able to process it quicker than most of the room. I mean, that was such a huge thing for me when my dad told me that, because nobody had ever talked about my intellect in that sort of way. I actually do better with more leaders who think a little bit more slowly because those of us who are fast thinkers are also fast talkers. I've developed over time the ability to think about what I say more carefully, but I definitely, as a child, would say the first thing that came to my mind and ask the question. And that was not always what anybody wanted to hear. And it got me into plenty of trouble. Yeah, that's
It is
so interesting
interesting.
because, of course, haven't we conditioned, like you talked about, the kids that sort of hold back or the ones that aren't so fast to speak? And I'm thinking then, is it because they're not the fastest thinkers? Like they need a little bit more time, but they're going to get there and they're actually deep thinkers. Is it because there's too many quick thinkers in the room who are taking up some of that space and then it's time to move on before the slower thinkers get there? Like I'm
That makes
thinking
sense.
about this in terms too of like a of like a meeting, you know, where you've got the quick thinkers who are talking about ideas and getting places quick, and then the meeting's over before the slower thinkers have a chance to actually say what they've gotten to. And it's actually really significant.
Often when I'm in these group setting, like if I'm in a brainstorming where the point is all of us throwing spaghetti at the wall, then
Hmm.
I'll flip my think fast switch, if you will. And
Yeah.
but generally speaking, I'm a slow thinker, like because I'm a strategic thinker, which is inherently slow. I mean, you can do it quickly, like when you just have to lean into your feedback loops of past experience. You know, when you're having to,
Yeah.
like, you're in a crazy situation you have to make, you're like, well, I've been here, let's fill in all the gaps with what I know, and so we can make fast decisions. But
Right.
generally, like in groups, when I've kind of just like deep listen and this, I'm not going to give a lot of feedback at the time, and I'm often thinking about it, and I'll go into the like these little rabbit trails of thinking. So I often am not speaking up much in meetings because I'm deep in thought and processing
Hmm.
everything as you go. So I usually come back to after meetings, and that sometimes can stink, like you mentioned in class, because if I'm really in my head thinking about stuff, I don't have the questions as we're going. And
Yeah.
that was tougher, when I was in college in the 90s because email was just beginning to be a thing. So it's like if I wanted to follow up on a question, I had to drag myself across campus to go to the
Go to
professor's
office hours.
office
Yeah.
hours, to follow up on stuff where now like I have students email me right after class, and I usually will get a preponderance of emails, and I get that, or they'll swing by. I always have the policy, if my office door's open, I'm somewhere on campus. And so, I'll
Uh-huh.
come in and there'll be people waiting for me to get back, or they'll drop in. I'm like, oh, I was thinking about what you said. So, yeah, I'm a slower thinker, general, if I can be, or when I'm in the position to do so, because I like to
Yeah.
really think things to within an inch of their life.
Well, I think we need that. And actually, I'm really encouraged that someone who has leadership qualities is also a slow thinker, and that isn't. The quick thinking is not necessarily a signal for leadership. You can be a slower thinker. I'm going to stop the interview there, and you'll have to come back for part 2 next week to hear as Nathan and I continue to talk about leadership from our atypical perspectives. Big thanks, as always, to Lilia Keys for our intro and outro music.